1949 and Professor Dershowitz in 1953. The format of the debate tonight, each debater will have about 7 minutes if they want for opening comments. Then we'll have 7 rounds of questions. The first person who is asked the question will have 4 minutes to answer, and the other debater will have 2 minutes to respond. And there'll be 2 questions to each round, and then we'll have closing comments and questions from the audience. So obviously I cannot think of everything, although I'd like to think that I could think of everything, so I hope you people will think of the questions that I don't have. Rabbi Meir Kahane is perhaps the most well-known Jewish leader in the world, and certainly the most controversial. His fame started in 1968 when he organized the Jewish Defense League, which became notorious for its militant activities against the Soviet Union, as well as for its self-defense patrols in the inner city, which were meant to protect poor and elderly Jews. Arrested many times for his beliefs and convictions, at one point he served 11 months in a federal prison, and naturally, in prison he agitated for and won kosher food rights for all inmates behind bars who happened to be Jewish. In 1971, Rabbi Kahane fulfilled his Jewish obligation of living in Israel by making Aliyah. Rabbi Kahane formed his own political party called Kah, which means thus, and though he lost his first 3 attempts to win a seat in the Knesset, which is Israel's parliament, he won 1 seat on his 4th attempt. And all hell broke loose. If elections were held today, the polls in Israel conservatively predict he will win at least 5 more seats. Rabbi Kahane is an ordained Orthodox rabbi, a newspaper columnist for the Jewish press, and author of half a dozen books, including They Must Go, which was supposed to be on sale here, but maybe after we close the debate outside we'll peddle the books. He is a graduate from New York Law School and has a master's degree in international law and relations from New York University. Rabbi Kahane, like Professor Dershowitz, is a sports fan, and I would like to tell you a story about how much of a sports fan he is. Last November, Kahane held a massive rally on behalf of Soviet Jewry. Over 400 people showed up, and 88 were arrested. Indeed, at Kahane protests, arrests are mandatory. Yet hardly anyone from the press covered the protests, the raison d'etre of the rally. Kahane, after he was released from jail, was scheduled to fly back to Israel that night. In the car, the rabbi was silent. His driver, David Rubin, thought he was depressed because the protests garnered hardly any publicity. After a long interval of silence, Kahane turned to his young driver and said, "At least the Giants won." People who I know that know of Professor Dershowitz have always described him with grudging respect. The lawyers that I am acquainted with have never described him in terms of endearment. Once, out of curiosity, I asked one of these lawyers who spoke in uncomplimentary terms what he had against Alan Dershowitz. After all, my wife says Professor Dershowitz is the fairest person she knows of. The lawyer sighed and said Dershowitz is disgusting. He has accomplished so darn much. And he has. At the age of 28, Professor Dershowitz is appointed full professorship at the Harvard Law Faculty, the youngest in the school's history. He has written 5 books, 25 scholarly articles, 50 magazine articles, and 100 newspaper columns, and his newspaper column is nationally syndicated and can be read locally in the Boston Herald. His most recent book, The Best Defense, which was supposed to be on sale here, was a national bestseller. Business Week described it as a gripping reading and a cross between a thriller and a confessional autobiography. Professor Dershowitz's clients have ranged from a Klaus von Bülow to an F. Lee Bailey to an Anatoly Sharansky and to the Jewish Defense League bomb. Tonight, Professor Dershowitz hopes to throw some debating bombs back to the founder of the Jewish Defense League, Rabbi Kahane. Professor Dershowitz has received awards from many national organizations, including the American Jewish Congress and the Anti-Defamation League of the B'nai B'rith. Much of his time is spent raising funds for charity through speaking engagements. Professor Dershowitz keeps in shape by playing a mean game of basketball, and with this crowd he has a built-in advantage, not only because he's a hometown boy, but more importantly, he is a Celtics fan. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Alan Dershowitz.
speaking at this great meeting house, which for so many years, indeed centuries, has been a focal point of controversial debates. I was told by the curator here tonight that in the 1920s and 30s, debates about birth control were held here over the opposition of the mayor of the city, and other controversial topics were debated here. It's extremely fitting, therefore, that after Boston University allowed the heckler's veto, the threat of violence, to veto an event that this great meeting house came in and allowed this debate to come forward. I finally have figured out where Rabbi Kahane went wrong. To come from Brooklyn and be a Giant fan? My God. We do go back a long time together. Not only were we on the same debate team, I have a picture of both of us from our Elkanite, the yearly yearbook. But I'm told by my mother, who's the source of all history, apocryphal or otherwise, that my grandfather sold Rabbi Kahane's father the engagement ring, which allowed for him to come into this very world. So I feel some responsibility for... When I agreed to do this debate, a lot of my friends, very good friends, devoted friends, rabbis in the area, wrote to me and called me and said, "Why are you debating Rabbi Kahane? Are you not legitimating his views by debating him? Are you not acknowledging his right to be part of the Jewish dialogue?" And it gave me great pause, and I thought a good deal about it. And I want to start by indicating why I am debating Rabbi Kahane. I'm debating Rabbi Kahane here tonight because too few blacks debated and responded to Jesse Jackson and Louis Farrakhan. Debating Rabbi Kahane here tonight because no Arabs debate Yasser Arafat. I think it's imperative that the world know not only that the vast majority of Jews repudiate Rabbi Kahane's views, but also why we repudiate those views. I'm here tonight to put the lie to those PLO protesters who stood outside of Rabbi Kahane's talk at Brookline just a month ago and claimed that there are no differences between Rabbi Kahane's views and the views of peace-loving Israelis and peace-loving American Jews and Americans who support Israel. I'm here to also demonstrate my vocal opposition to those Jews, Israelis and American, who seek to silence Rabbi Kahane. On election night in Israel, I sat around the home of a very distinguished judge. We were surrounded by judges and politicians and lawyers and barristers, and as soon as the election results came in, and it was announced that Rabbi Kahane had gotten 25,000 votes, 1.5% or so of the population, and thereby, under Israel's unique system of election, was entitled to one seat in Knesset, immediately, following the groan of disappointment, a conspiracy of silence began. These great, brilliant lawyers sat around that room deciding how they could most effectively quiet Rabbi Kahane in an undemocratic manner. Some said, let's make it a crime to say what he believes, and legislation has been introduced into the Knesset to do just that. Some said we should not have allowed him to run. And of course, the Commission on Elections of Israel disallowed him the right to run. Some said, don't give him his Knesset immunity. Others said, strip him of his Israeli citizenship and of his American citizenship. Some said, deport him. Many said, blacklist him. To me, the democratic response to Rabbi Kahane is to answer him, to compete with him in the marketplace of ideas, to persuade people to reject his ideas on their merits and their demerits. The democratic answer to bad speech, whether it be racist speech or offensive speech of other kinds, is not censorship or blacklisting, but rather more speech, more debate, better ideas. I am debating Rabbi Kahane because I want to stop the downgrading of the quality of the debate about Rabbi Kahane, to stop the kind of name-calling and personalization that has characterized so much of the attack on Rabbi Kahane and occasionally by Rabbi Kahane. I am debating him because I disapprove of guilt by analogy. I disapprove of efforts to show that Kahane is, quote, just like Nazis who deported Jews, enacted Nuremberg racial purity laws, and conducted Kristallnachts. These analogies, in my view, constitute the gravest insult to the memory of the 6 million. There is enough wrong with Rabbi Kahane's programs without confusing the issues by false analogies, whether they have been to Hitler, Arafat, Khomeini, or Farrakhan. Kahane's programs are very bad on their own terms, as I hope to show tonight. They become neither better nor worse by comparison with other bad programs. We should address Kahane's programs for what they are. To be fair, we should try to find out precisely what it is that Rabbi Kahane advocates. I think there are two fundamental differences between Kahane and the vast majority of Jews over the principles of first, democracy, and second, killing of innocent people. The vast majority of Americans and Israeli Jews embrace principles of democracy, of liberty, of equality, of choice. Kahane rejects each of these. He poses a false dichotomy to us. We must decide either to support a Jewish state in Israel or a democracy. He frightens us into believing we cannot have both. He derides the principle of Western democracy, conveniently forgetting that unless Israel were a democracy, he would not be allowed to espouse his anti-democratic views, to seek election to the Knesset, to secure a seat with so tiny a fraction of the vote, so tiny that in most American states he would not even appear on the ballot, to travel to the United States under an Israeli passport, to speak here, and then to return with full citizenship and full Knesset rights. Indeed, if Rabbi Kahane's principles were ever to be accepted in Israel, he and his followers would be among the first victims, and then I would have to go to Israel to defend his right to speak. If Arabs can be deported because they are dangerous to the security of the state, then it would take little imagination to come up with a rationale for why Kahane should also be supported. Indeed, if a majority vote were taken in Israel today, the Arabs would finish a long second to Kahane in terms of who the majority of Israelis would like to see silenced and deported. It was no coincidence that the Election Commission decided erroneously, in my view, and in the view of the Israeli Supreme Court, that both Kahane and an extremist left-wing Arab Jewish party should be banned from the election. Just one more moment on the killing of innocent people. I know of hardly any principle more sacred than the prohibition against deliberately killing innocent people. Yet it is a central aspect of the Kahane philosophy, a philosophy repeatedly turned to practice with the encouragement of Rabbi Kahane, that it is permissible to deliberately kill innocent people, to deter or take revenge against the killing of other innocent people. Just recently, Rabbi Kahane was quoted as saying the following about the rocket attack on an Arab civilian bus in which an innocent young Arab was killed and 10 others wounded, and I quote from the rabbi, "May the hands which did this be strengthened. It was a brave and noble act." Rabbi Kahane, it was a dastardly and cowardly act. And I ask you, as a rabbi, how you can justify encouraging the deliberate murder of innocent people, whether Arab or Jews. Thank you.
I think that this event in Boston is an historical one in the sense that for the first time, a leading figure in Boston jury has agreed not to defame me, but to debate me. I think that people who are unable to debate defame and label. And labels are the last refuge of non-thinkers. And so I want to thank my fellow alumnus from TA for having agreed for the second time played me once in New York City, now in Boston. I come this evening to speak to you about things that are painful. Painful subjects, painful topics. For too long, Western Jews, including Western Orthodox Jews, have attempted to run away from the dichotomy, the contradiction between some basic Western concepts and Jewish concepts. And it's very good and very, very easy to speak about what the Jewish people think. The question is, do most Jews really know what Judaism thinks? That's the question. The question not whether 1% of the people voted for me in Israel, or whether that's a large amount or a small amount. The question isn't whether I made the test. The question is, are the things that I speak the truth? I don't hate Arabs. I love Jews. And there's a great, great difference. We are faced with a problem, and that problem is the contradiction between Zionism, between Judaism on the one hand, and Western democracy on the other hand. And that's not merely a frightening charge, it's a fact. And we have to deal with it. The question isn't, are there good Arabs or bad Arabs? I think it's content for the Arab to state that a good Arab will accept living in the state of Israel. What Arab wants to live in a state which defines itself legally, de jure, as the Jewish state? What Arab in Israel? What citizen of Israel? What Arab citizen of Israel stands up every morning and thinks of the fact that his national anthem, Hatikva, speaks such words as Nefesh Yehudi Homia, the soul of a Jew yearns? What Arab can sing those words? And when Tufik Tubi, a Communist Party Arab member of Knesset, opposed a proposed bill to make that the official national anthem of Israel, I understood him. I understood Tufik Tubi, because I understand the Arabs, and they understand me, and neither of us can understand Professor Dershowitz. I understand that no Israeli Arab on Independence Day runs out into the streets to celebrate his defeat. I understand that. I understand that when the Arab lives in a state which has a law of return which applies to Jews only, he isn't happy about that. And I understand that if Israel will be a Western democracy which allows Arabs and Jews to have equal rights, political rights, that someday they could become the majority. And then there will not be a Jewish state for no Arab, no self-respecting Arab. And they are all self-respecting Arabs. They all have national pride. No Arab, if he has a majority, will ever agree to live in a state which calls itself the Jewish state. And there will be a law of return for Arabs, and rightly so, under democracy. That is the problem. I live in Israel. I don't live in Boston. I live in a country in which the Galilee already has a majority of Arabs. I live in a country where last week, in the Galilee, an Israeli army vehicle was firebombed on the road between Nazareth and Kharkana. And that's what will happen again and again. I was at Hebrew University, where 300 Arab students sang the PLO national anthem. They were all Israelis. I'm in a country in which the campuses, Hebrew University, Haifa University, and Tel Aviv, are putting out the future Arab leaders of the PLO. And I understand that. That's why I say they must go. Because if they don't go, we will go. Innocent people. This is a picture of a man named David Raziel. He's a national hero today. There is a village named after him, Ramat Raziel. Streets in Jerusalem, in Haifa, in Netanya, named after Raziel. Do you know who this hero was? There is a stamp in Israel with his picture on it. You know who David Raziel was? He was head of the Irgun in the 1930s. The Irgun was the underground, same kind of people who today sit in the prison in Israel, in Tel Mond. In the 1930s, the Arabs rioted and killed Jews. 510 Jews were murdered between 1936 and 1938. The official reaction of the Jews was that of a professor, Dершовица. Havlaga, self-restraint. We don't sink to their level. They shoot us and we bury our dead. David Raziel did not accept that. He accepted the Jewish concept, go, which is in the Talmud, and which means he who comes to slay you, slay him first. David Raziel, the national hero of Israel, planted a bomb in the Arab marketplace in Jerusalem. It went off and it killed 27 Arabs. I'm not happy about that. He wasn't happy about that. But who are we to speak to innocent Jews, to dead Jews, and say, we don't know exactly who the murderers are, so therefore we can't do anything. I don't want to kill Arabs. With God's help, when I become the Prime Minister of Israel, not a single Arab will ever be killed in Israel, because not a single Arab will be there.
Professor Dерshowitz, Rabbi Kahane, thank you very much. Unfortunately, you're answering my 5th, 6th, and 7th questions before I even ask them, so we'll have to go back to the beginning. The first question will go to Rabbi Kahane. He will have 4 minutes with which to answer, and Professor Dерshowitz will have 2 minutes to respond. Rabbi Kahane, why be Jewish? The laws of Judaism handed down over 3,000 years ago seem to have little bearing to the world today. For example, a Jewish law says that it is forbidden to open the door of a refrigerator on Shabbos because the inside light goes on. Isn't that out of date? Refrigerators did not exist 3,000 years ago. Rabbi Kahane, why be Jewish?
4 minutes, that's a very, very good question to answer. I think that rather than touch on that aspect, I think that in that question we have the greatest problem that faces most Jews, most rabbis, and most Jewish leaders. I believe that the average Jewish leader, in 25,000 words or more, would not answer that question. I believe that when a Jew brings his son or his daughter to his local temple rabbi to try to dissuade that child from marrying someone that is not Jewish, that rabbi has not the slightest answer to give to that child. Let me tell you what being Jewish is not. It's not being ethical. You don't have to be Jewish to be ethical. I know some wonderfully ethical Catholics, Protestants, Buddhists, and atheists. And the temple rabbi who speaks about, but Judaism is ethical, is a racist. Judaism is ethical. Christianity is ethical. And George Meany was ethical. And Mao Zedong was ethical. Ask them. The fact of the matter is that to be a Jew, when you say I am a Jew, that what you have done is you have raised a barrier between yourself and every non-Jew. And unless you have a very good reason to be different, you have no right to be a Jew, then you're a racist. The reason to be a Jew is because there is a God in this world. And the God who gave a real God, not this modern concept, God who is a spirit within man, like indigestion. A real God, a transcendental being who appeared at Sinai to the Jewish people and gave us a Torah. That is why one should be a Jew. That's the only thing that we have that no one else has. Everything else we share with them. We share tanks with the Syrians. We share ethics with my friends out there who were picnicking. The Torah, that's the reason to be a Jew. And the tragedy of this country and of Israel is that we raised a generation of young Jews who ask the question of their parents, why should I be Jewish? And get no answer. There's only one answer, it's a painful one. Sit and study your Judaism. A Judaism that either came from Sinai or is not worth keeping at all.
There is not only one answer to why I'm Jewish. Jewishness is a great tradition that goes back many thousands of years. Indeed, it is many traditions reflected in a variety of different ways. Jewishness to me is a choice and a challenge. And to say that there is only one Jewishness is to suggest that there are single answers to all complicated questions. For Rabbi Kahane, Jewishness is not only orthodoxy. In the most recent issue of the Jewish Press, which is sold in Cambridge, he attacks what he calls modern orthodoxy. He even gives it a name, modern-dox, and levels a great attack on Bar Ilan University and the president of Bar Ilan and other great leaders at Yeshiva University. There are too many Jews in the world, too many different Jews in the world, for there to be one leader, one answer, one approach. Israel is a Jewish state, not in the sense of an Orthodox state or a Kahane state. Israel is a Jewish sense in the broadest sense of that word. Original Zionism was founded by a non-Orthodox man named Theodor Herzl. The great heroes of Israel who are also on stamps and who reflect a different tradition from the tradition of terrorism were the Ben-Gurions, who had to resort to violence to counterattack against the Irgun, tragically, and who himself was not a religious man. But Ben-Gurion was every bit as good a Jew as Rabbi Kahane. And I think what we have to fight against is the single definition of Jewishness which excludes rather than includes. And I look to a Jewishness which is expansive and which gives great opportunity and challenge and which permits us to expand our horizons and to seek the greatest of the Jewish tradition and not those aspects of the Jewish tradition which are so easily quoted out of context from the Talmud and anywhere else, and which can justify some of the greatest excesses and abuses of modern day life. So I hope that we see Judaism not in the narrow sense of the word, but see Judaism in the broadest, most progressive, and most inclusive sense of that word.
Professor Dershowitz, Rabbi Kahane tells a parable about a traveler passing a barn. Painted on the side of the barn are many targets, and in each target an arrow has hit the bullseye. The traveler goes up to the farmer to praise him on his wonderful marksmanship and ask him how he has managed to perfect his skills. The farmer says his marksmanship was easier than it looks because all he did was to shoot an arrow at the barn, and wherever it landed, he painted a bullseye around it. Professor Dershowitz, aren't Jews like myself and yourself, who are less than halakhically pure, who don't follow the Jewish code exactly? Aren't we hypocritical in our approach to Judaism? Shouldn't we obey God's laws without questioning them? And how would you define the essence of Judaism?
Well, it's much the same question. No, I don't think we're hypocritical. I don't think there is pure Judaism and all the rest of it is some kind of a varnish. I think everybody in every generation must define its Jewishness for itself. What do we, after all, have in common with the Jews oppressed in the Soviet Union and seeking political freedom because he is being oppressed on the ground of his Jewishness? The Jews I visited in the Soviet Union, many of them had never read a single verse from the Torah. Many of them had never heard of the Halakha. Many of them had never understood what it meant to be a ritual Jew. The Jews in Ethiopia, who were rescued as recently as yesterday by the joint efforts of the American government, the Israeli government, the Sudanese government, are very different kinds of Jews from the Jews of Borough Park with whom I grew up, and the Jews of Yemen, whom we have visited on many occasions. There were bonds. When I went to the Soviet Union and I met Jews there, I felt a kinship. I felt that there, but for the grace of my great-grandfather, sat I, though I know I wouldn't have been as brave as an Anatoly Sharansky. Or Yuri Orlov, who was not Jewish, but was being oppressed because he stood up for Jewish rights and other human rights. I know I will disappoint you when I say there is no single essence of Judaism, that Judaism changes and varies from generation to generation and location to location. I hate to admit that I think one of the greatest unifiers of Jews throughout the world, tragically, has been anti-Semitism, has been negative attitudes toward Jews. As Elia Ehrenberg once said, I will remain a Jew so long as there are anti-Semites. That is a negative aspect of Judaism, to be sure, but we live in a very negative century. After all, we live in the century of the Holocaust. We live in the century where the Germans tried to kill a whole race of people who had very little in common with each other, many of whom did not even define themselves as Jews. It is too early from the Holocaust. It is only 40 years since its end for us to try to think of more positive definitions of Judaism. We live in an age where 3 million Jews are held captive in the Soviet Union because they are Jewish. We live in a day where, according to just yesterday's New York Times, there is still considerable anti-Semitism in this country. Let's work on that problem first. Let's first try to eliminate the negatives. Let's first give us the freedom to be positive Jews the way we can. Let's try to build bridges and live in peace. Let's try to build bridges between the black communities and the Jewish communities and the Arab communities and the Jewish communities. Then we will have the luxury to sit back and think through positively what it is that brings us together. And in the end, we may find that there is very little that brings us together. In the end, we may find that Rabbi Kahane and I have less in common than I have with some of my Cambridge colleagues, or Rabbi Kahane has with some of his other colleagues who are not Jewish. I am not searching for the silver thread that brings us together. We have problems today as Jews in the world. We have problems in every part of the world. Let's address and confront those problems. Let's be pragmatic. Certainly, when we were trying to fight the Holocaust, we did not have to answer the question, what is a Jew? Somebody told us what was a Jew during the period of the Holocaust. Somebody in the Soviet Union tells us what it takes to have Zhid written on your passport. Let's confront those problems. Let's address those problems first, and then we will have time for the halachic discussions, for the refined discussions, and perhaps then we can finally solve the question, a problem that I think will be with us from now until the end of the millennium. What, after all, is a Jew?
I think that there's no question that we have to clearly realize that being Jewish because the anti-Semite makes us so is a very bad reason to be a Jew. Of course, I don't excommunicate any Jew. Of course, I sat in prison many, many times for Jews everywhere and never asked, is he an Orthodox, is he not Orthodox? Of course that's true. Of course that's true. And I certainly need no lesson from anybody on loving Jews. But that's for me to realize, Dershowitz, and you people who are basically Jewish Jews. But what of the millions of Jews in this country who feel nothing Jewish about themselves? What about all those youngsters that at BU, and all the other campuses at MIT and at Harvard and at Berkeley and at Madison. What about all those youngsters? Do you really believe that one of those youngsters sitting here and hearing about the Holocaust will be moved? He'll say, well, that happened, it's a terrible thing, and we should fight to make sure it never happens again to anybody, not just to Jews. That's what he'll say. So obviously the question arises again. Why fight for Soviet Jews? Why not fight for the rights of all Soviet people to be free? Why Soviet Jews? Why do we zero in on Jews? That's the question. It's not what we have a tradition. No big deal. The question is, why should we be human beings? That's what youngsters are crying out for answers to. Why should I be Jewish, father, mother? I want to be a human being. It gets down in the end, not to anti-Semites. It gets down to the end. Being Jewish has got to have a reason, a positive reason. And there's only one reason, and that reason is Torah. Of course, within Torah there can be differences, and there are differences. And my attack on Bar Ilan professor, as you know, was not based merely upon views, but upon the fact that this liberal place and institution of orthodoxy refused to allow me to speak when I was invited by the student body. That was my attack on them. So, again, we have got to be honest with ourselves. The worst of all sins is dishonesty. And our children will forgive us all sins except hypocrisy. They want an honest answer. Why should I be Jewish? We don't have an answer. We will lose our children.
Rabbi Kahane, you are constantly rallying against the West, criticizing Jews for what you call their westernized, Hellenized, gentilized concepts. Doesn't the West have much that is good about it? What happens when Jewish concepts conflict with scientific concepts, such as with skin grafts? And how would you define the essence of Judaism?
First of all, state that, of course, there is much that is magnificent about Western culture, and much that is magnificent about Eastern culture. The question is, how much of Western culture dovetails with Judaism? That's what the Jew has to ask. Is Thomas Jefferson Judaism? That's what is Burke Judaism? Is Rousseau Judaism? That's what we have to ask. Now, part of it is. A lot of it isn't. It is not. As a Jew, a religious Jew, and I believe that a religious Jew is someone who is much, much more than a practitioner of Jewish ritual. I believe that being a religious Jew is one who accepts upon himself or herself the yoke of heaven. What is just? That which Judaism declares to be just. What is the definition of mercy? That which is found within the Bible and the Quran. We don't create God in our image. That's the essence of Judaism. God made us, not we who thought of Him. God isn't something to be made to a perfect fit by some garment-centered Jew. When we observe what we believe, then we are not following Judaism. We are following Cohenism if our name is Cohen, or Goldbergism if our name is Goldberg, or Dershovicism if our name is Dershowitz. And therefore, we have to realize that Judaism imposes upon us standards, whether we like it or not. We just finished celebrating a Jewish holiday, Purim. And of course, we have long since forgotten the essence of that holiday. Purim is fun. Most people keep Purim and Hanukkah because it's easy. The rabbis tell us that Haman arose because of the fact that years earlier King Saul refused to wipe out the entire people. Amalek. Now can you imagine, consider that kind, here is a commandment to wipe out the entire people. Doesn't make me happy, because I'm a Western Jew. I was raised in Brooklyn. I was raised in the spirit of Thomas Jefferson and all of the rest. And it's a tremendous conflict, but I overcame it. Because the essence of Judaism is, do I do what I want or do I do that which God wants? And we have to face up to it. There is no escaping it. And if one were to ask me, why is it that they hate you so much? Why is it that in Israel they don't hate Gush Emunim? They oppose it. The leftists oppose it, but they don't hate it. The leftists are opposed to Tchiyah, but they don't. Why do they hate you? Because I touch the most sensitive and the rawest of all nerves. I force the Jew to choose, to be honest. And that's a difficult thing, it's a painful thing, and people don't like to be forced to choose. For so many years, people were able to run away. We can't run away. We have to face up to truth. We have to face up to so many, many truths, among which is that Ben-Gurion, when he was the prime minister, didn't allow an Arab to leave his village at night without a special pass, which I think is a magnificent example of democracy. In any case, honesty, never dishonesty. The essence of Judaism is accepting Ol Malchut Shamayim, the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. The rabbis say, Mahu Rachum, as he is merciful, so shall you be merciful. And the meaning is clear. As he defines mercy, that's how you shall define it. And not in your Western terms, or your Eastern terms, or your Northern terms, or your Southern terms. Either there is a Judaism or there is not. But let's not play games. Elijah stood on Mount Carmel and turned to the Jews and said, how long do you hold between two opinions? If Baal is God, then follow him. If the Lord is God, then follow him, but you can't follow both. Either Judaism or Westernism, but you can't have it.
I hope this question gives me an opportunity to shift away from what I think are meaningless discussions, essentially. Directly. Let's talk about the issue of skin grafts in Israel. Specifically, soldiers are dying. There are some religious people, 10% of the population, who do not believe that I, as an individual Jew, have the right to donate the skin off my body to save another human being. I reject that. I reject it on democratic principles. I reject it on Jewish principles. Me what to do as a Jew. I define the concept of pikuach nefesh, of saving human lives, differently than he does. Now the question is, who decides what I do with my body? Who decides whether I should permit my body to have an autopsy, or a skin graft, or an eye transplant, or a kidney transplant? The answer to that, on human principles, on Jewish principles, and on democratic principles, must be, I have the right to decide. Rabbi Kahane does not want to contribute his skin. He is entitled not to. But he is not entitled to sit together and create a coalition which prevents the majority of Israelis, a democratic country, from allowing a majority of Israelis to save other Israelis and other Arabs' lives. That's the policy question. You can debate the essence of Judaism all you want. But the issue is in Israel, which has a parliamentary democracy, should 5 or 7 or 10% of people who define themselves not only as Jewish, but as the only people capable of defining Jewishness, should they be entitled to make these decisions? My answer is clearly no. We disagree about that. Let's debate the issue on the merits.
Professor Dershowitz, to say that one is Jewish implies that Judaism is in some way superior to other religions. Therefore, isn't it about time that Islam's third holiest shrine, the Dome of the Rock, be moved from Jerusalem since it was built on the site of the Second Temple, the holiest site in all of Judaism? And if not, are you in favor of the present law which forbids Jews from praying at the Dome of the Rock?
I certainly do not in any way suggest that Jewishness or any other religion is superior to any other. I think it's an absurd concept of religion to say that because you are a devoted advocate of one religion, you somehow have to think of yourself as being superior to any other religion. There is nothing in Jewishness, there is nothing in my upbringing which in any way suggests that. I was taught by my grandparents and great-grandparents and parents that to be Jewish is not to be superior. Yes, it's to be somewhat different in the same way as any other adherence or affiliation that distinguishes you in some way to be defined by your own. No, I don't think either that the current law which forbids Jews from praying on the holy mountain site is good, nor do I believe that the Dome of the Rock should be replaced in some way. The Dome of the Rock is a very holy site. So is the place in which the Dome of the Rock is located. I think that once you have a debate about which religion is the right religion, which religion is the only religion, which religion shall control a particular geographic area, there's only one way to resolve it. The way it has been resolved historically through religious conflict at the beginning of time, bloodshed, warfare. I am not in favor of religious internecine warfare. There have to be ways of resolving this. If a group of smart Jewish lawyers can't figure out a way of developing a condominium concept for the temple and the dome, look, let's build up. We can build up on top of the temple. We know that real estate values are much better when you're higher up. Let's leave the dome the way it is. Let's allow the temple to be built up on the top. I don't mean to mock it. I mean to seriously suggest that we have to move toward compromise. Today, the compromise is very simple. And it's it's difficult in some ways, it's simple in outward. And that is, the religious sites generally in Jerusalem are controlled by religious authorities. Christian religious authorities control Christian religious sites, Muslim religious authorities control Muslim religious sites, and Jewish religious authorities control Jewish religious sites. There's a conflict over several of the sites. We cannot expect either side to give in. We have to come up with creative ways and creative devices. There also have to be rights for the non-religious. And that is, I don't think Jewish authorities should be entitled to tell a Jew who doesn't believe in a particular halachic rule that says a Jew may not step on or pray in or go near the site of the old temple. I don't think the Jews should be prevented from doing that. I think Jews who want to comply with halakha should understand that there are halachic prohibitions against that. I also don't believe that Rabbi Kahane should be prevented from praying at a site that he regards as holy just because Arabs also regard that site as holy. We have to compromise. Compromise is in the essence of resolving religious disputes. But I certainly do not believe that Israel, because it is the government in power, should any more deny Arabs the right to control their religious sites than the abominable situation that existed when Jordan controlled eastern Jerusalem and prevented Jews from going to its holy sites. We must compromise. We must resolve these things without bloodshed. And the hardest way to do that is to give the authority to make these decisions to the most intractable and uncompromising of religious leaders. In the end, a conflict between two religions is a political dispute. And the political dispute should be resolved by politicians, by people who know how to compromise, by diplomats, by people who can work things out. The only other alternative is bloodshed and warfare, and I think we've had just about enough of that.
As far as I know, the state of Israel, and indeed the authority within the community of Jews in what was Palestine prior to the state, was not in the hands of the rabbis. It was in the hands of the politicians who know how to compromise. And thank God there was no bloodshed in Israel. What kind of nonsense is that? We have to reach a compromise. That's wonderful. Tell it to all the Arabs. The question here is not a religion, or the question here is a decision by the Arabs that the country belongs to them, that the Dome of the Rock and Jerusalem and Jaffa and Tel Aviv, and there's not a question of compromise. We agreed to a compromise in 1947. The UN proposed a partition plan. The Jews accepted it insanely. The Arabs went to war. In 1956, the Arabs went to war. Were the rabbis running the country then? The fundamentalists? Kahane? It was Ben-Gurion and Labor and all the compromises and all the ones that a couple of clever lawyers can get together and put together a condominium. Well, there's a little bit of a difference. And Moshe Aarons put it well when he was asked about the conflict. He said, "Gentlemen, this is the Middle East, not the Middle West." I don't know what your parents told you about Jews being different or better. I know that every single holiday, and I assume that on Passover, when you go to the synagogue, you will say, "Ata b'chaltanu mikol ha'amim." You have chosen us from all the nations. V'rumontanu mikol halashonot, and raised us up from all tongues. Stop the nonsense. The problem with most Jews is that they don't want goyim to hear that Jews think that they have the truth. We do. We do. But the difference between that and racism is a simple one. A racist is one who says, "I am better than you permanently, and you can never be as good as I am." And Jews don't say that. Any non-Jew who wants to become Jewish is as good a Jew as any Jew who was ever born Jewish. But this despicable ghetto kind of a mentality. I don't want to be worse than you, but I'm not better than you. But we do have the truth. We do have the truth. Every Baptist knows that God gave us the Torah at Mount Sinai. The trouble is that most Jews don't. I think that it is an obscenity that on the holiest of all Jewish sites, the Temple Mount, Arabs built a mosque. What would the Arabs, what would the Muslim world say if I tomorrow went to Mecca and built a little shtibel on the Kaaba? Would we hear about some compromises and you take the upper chamber with the lower chamber? No. I would oppose any Jew ever desecrating a Muslim holy site. I would be bitterly opposed to it. And I bitterly oppose the fact that Muslims came and desecrated the holy site in Judaism.
All the laws of Judaism, but the laws of the time of the debate we're running away from. So I'd like both of you to try to stick within the time limit. Rabbi, a few months ago the Knesset stripped you of your parliamentary immunity, in effect creating a special law which applied only to you. The religious parties which you claimed to have a natural affinity with abandoned you and walked out of the Knesset. Isn't this proof that your call for a theocratic Jewish state would be open to monumental corruption? And what would happen in a theocracy to the non-religious?
I'm not exactly sure that I got the connection between the first point and the second point. The fact is that on the first point, I was stripped of a part immunity. That part which allows a Knesset member to travel freely throughout the country anytime and any place that he so wishes. That part has been taken from me. It is the first and only time that this has ever happened. We have gone, of course, to the High Court, and we have asked an injunction. The hearing on it will be held April 1st. I think it's an obscenity. I think it's outrageous that for 36 years in the Knesset, Arab Communist Party members who are opposed to the very existence of Israel have sat. They travel around freely, spreading their own poison, and not once did anyone ever think of limiting them. I think it's an outrageous thing. Yes. As far as the Orthodox parties, voting for it, not voting for it, walking out of the Knesset, I don't think that that's relevant. I think that we can only mention one thing about it, and that is that both the right-wing nationalist parties and the Orthodox parties would like to see me out of the Knesset because of the fact that all the polls show us in the next election, with God's help, getting many more seats. So I think that is probably why they abstained. As far as what would happen to Jews in theocracy, I spoke about being honest. Let's be honest. Judaism is not democracy. If Judaism is God's law, do you really believe that God said, all right, now I want you all to every 4 years vote on whether we should keep the Sabbath? Now, one can reject Judaism. This is fine. And one can reject the fact that Torah comes from Sinai. And that's fine. That's at least this is honest. But if we believe that Judaism is God's word, do you really believe that democracy and Judaism are compatible? Democracy is a pragmatic concept. For all those people who don't know the truth, there must be democracy. Because who are you to tell me what is the truth? That's why democracy is not truth. It's a practical concept for people who don't know the truth. For all the Margaret Meads of this world, who say that there is no objective truth, and they prove it by showing that she visited a South Sea Pacific island, and that people eat their mothers-in-law. Ergo, it is not wrong to eat one's mother. It is a cultural aberration. Now, so, for those people, there must be democracy, because there are no objective truths. And that I can certainly see. But given the hypothesis, given the presumption that Judaism is truth, how in the world can you expect an Orthodox rabbi to agree to a system which every 4 years allows people to decide, we don't want the truth? So you want honesty? You always get it from me. Theocracy is a system which demands that the Jews keep God's word. Having said that, and knowing the framework in which we live, I would not be prepared for a civil war among Jews in order to impose it. Not because democracy is the right way, it isn't. Because I'm not prepared to see Jews fight other Jews. Therefore, in my concept, I want democracy for Jews. With the hope that someday they'll sit and learn and realize what that truth is, and by themselves accept it and impose it on themselves.
If everybody were to know the truth, and if everybody's agreement on the truth were identical, we wouldn't need democracy to vote periodically. But because we certainly don't know the truth, as Winston Churchill once said, it may be the worst of all systems except for all the others that have ever been tried. It's interesting to point out that Rabbi Kahane said he went to court for an injunction. Let's be clear about what Rabbi Kahane did. He went to a Western court of Harvard-trained Hellenistic lawyers and sought to have a granted injunction citing the principles of Thomas Jefferson, because principles of Jewish law would not entitle him to an injunction. What he's going to win his case on, and I want to be very optimistic with you, Rabbi, I know the justices of that court very well, I think you're going to win your case, because Israel is a vibrant democracy, which believes in everybody's right to speech and everybody's right to travel, including your own. But God forbid you should be on that court, or people like you. Then what you would do, notwithstanding your tipping of your hat to democracy, is you would first take away rights from Arabs, and then, I submit, you would take them away from Jews with whom you disagree, because you are on record as wanting to take the right away from Jews who want to run for parliament on a ticket which favors support of the PLO. And you are in favor of taking democratic rights away from Jews. And if your own principles were applicable to you, you would today be sitting in the same prison in Talmud where terrorists who have tragically followed some of your dictates sit awaiting a fair trial, which is going to be given to them not under Jewish law, but under democratic law.
Speaking of democracy, Professor Dershowitz, how would you answer Rabbi Kahane's question, which is, theoretically, if the Arabs become a majority in Israel, do you give them, through democratic and peaceful means, the right to vote Israel to the 23rd Arab state?
We don't even have to reach that issue. What if Jews decide by democratic principles to vote against principles that Rabbi Kahane holds sacred? What if Jews tomorrow were to vote to repeal the law of return? I would fight tooth and nail against that. I think the law of return is an essential law for Israel. The law of return is a historic necessity. The existence of a Jewish state is a historic necessity. Anybody who reads the current literature that is coming out about the American abandonment of the Jews, about the Canadian abandonment of the Jews, about the Western abandonment of the Jews, understands the Holocaust could not have been carried out just by Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. The Holocaust is an American responsibility, a Canadian responsibility, a South American responsibility, a European responsibility, an Arab responsibility. And let no Arab try to shirk responsibility for the Holocaust when you learn that the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem spent those years in Adolf Hitler's Germany, and when you learn what Arab efforts there were to annihilate the Jews. Let there be nobody on the face of this earth denying responsibility for the Holocaust, or denying the need for a place where Jews and others can seek asylum. That is the essence of what we need to continue in Israel. But Israel is a democracy. And if Rabbi Kahane and I together fail in our efforts to persuade Jews to maintain the law of return, then we will have lost our fight for democracy, much like in the United States. The old conundrum, Rabbi Kahane's conundrum is not new. I heard it many, many years ago from people who said, what if communists were to take over the United States by democratic means and seek to repeal the First Amendment? That's not an answer. That's a challenge. We have to fight against that. We have to persuade the people of this country that the First Amendment and the Fourth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment retain their viability, and hope that by democratic principles, we in the United States will preserve our liberties. The fact that there is an increase in Arab population at the same time as there are increases in Jewish population poses a challenge. A challenge for increased aliyah. A challenge to try to open the gates of the Soviet Union. A challenge for airlifts to get Ethiopian Jews into Israel. If, in the end, the Arabs beat us by numbers, there is no way we will beat them by the moral superiority of our position. How can Rabbi Kahane expect to prevail if the demographics point in the other direction? We have to fight that battle. We have to look at it as a challenge. But let us not accept the false dichotomy. Let us not resort to saying that we can use non-democratic means, expulsion, expropriation of property, deportation, to preserve the essential democratic and Jewish character of Israel. I am confident that as we approach the 21st century, Israel will continue to be a viable Jewish state because it is a viable democratic state. The greatest dangers to the Jewishness of Israel lie in Rabbi Kahane's extremes, his definition of the Jewishness of Israel in insular terms, in terms that will drive many young people from Israel. If Rabbi Kahane wants to make it a crime, not only a sin, ultimately, for a Jew not to observe the halakha, we will see the Yordim, the people who leave Israel and come to the United States and other countries, increase multifold. We want to increase the population of Israel, and the way to do that is to open one's arms, not to close it, to make it an acceptable place for people all over the world to accept both the democratic character of Israel and the Jewish character. That's the challenge. And it is no answer to say that we must choose between the false dichotomy proposed by Rabbi Kahane.
must say that I was impressed. Dr. Dershowitz took 4 minutes brilliantly not answering the question. The question wasn't whether it's a challenge. Of course it's a challenge. Agreed, it is a challenge. The question was, assuming that the Arabs beat us, would you be willing to accept it? The question is, do they have a right to be a majority? In theory. Under democracy, of course they have that right. Under Zionism, not religious Zionism, under the Zionism of a man named Herzl who wrote a book called The Jewish State, of course they don't have that right. You talk about answers, Aliyah, I can imagine all the Harvard teachers leaving tomorrow morning for Aliyah. How easy it is to talk about Aliyah when one has not the slightest intention of doing it. The truth of the matter is that Jews are leaving Israel for many, many reasons. It's certainly not because of Kahane. The Jews, the Israelis in Los Angeles didn't leave because of Kahane. The Israelis in Rego Park, or I'm sure in Boston, a couple of Yodim didn't leave because of Kahane. We have problems. We have terrible problems. But it's no answer to say, well, it's challenging. If we meet it, fine, and if not, halal, it's a pity. Well, it's not a pity. I'm not prepared to lose my state to our bullets or to our babies. And I think that is a problem. It's a contradiction. We have to face up to it. And there's only one answer. Long before the Arabs become a majority, what do you think will happen when 1/3 of the Knesset is out? 1/3, forget the majority. 1/3 of the Arabs, 1/3 of the Knesset is Arab. How many Arabs will sit on the Committee of Defense and Security listening to a secret talk by the Chief of Staff, in which he warns all the Arabs, please don't carry a word of what I say outside of this room, and Tubi says, Yad al-Lev, my scouts honor, I want that. What is going to happen? The Galilee today has a majority of Arabs. The Little Triangle today has a majority of Arabs. Wadi Arab today has a majority of Arabs. Akko in 5 years will be an Arab city. And Jaffa, and Ramla, and Lida. What's happening to us? We sit here talking in terms of theory. I speak in terms of practice. One more point. The Holocaust, people say it's the Arabs' fault, it's the British fault, it's the Pope's fault, but nonsense. I'm sick and tired of hearing Jews talk about how Goyim are to blame for the Holocaust. I don't expect anything more from them. The ones who are really to blame are the Jews who the Jews.
I have to skip some questions because some of the responses are as long as the answers. Rabbi Kahane, you have praised, as Professor Dershowitz pointed out, the so-called Jewish terrorists for their attack upon innocent Arabs. Aren't these vigilantes dangerous people? And how can you condone this lawless activity that would certainly lead Israel down the road to anarchy?
I've always said that it's a tragedy that those Jews took the law into their own hands. It was the job of the government of Israel to do what they did. You know what it means to live in Kiryat Arba? And have buses stoned every single day. It's gotten so bad that it doesn't even make papers there. What are we supposed to do? Jews live in settlements, and their wives are there, and their children are there. What are we supposed to do when we see an impotent government? One which is, on the one hand, has its hands tied by American pressure, and on the other hand, by guilt feelings. Guilt feelings. They're not terrorists. They're heroes. They're heroes. What is being said about them today was said 35 years ago about Menachem Begin, and about the Irgun, and about the Sternists. And I remember on the day that Menachem Begin, in retaliation for the hanging of Irgun soldiers, took 2 British sergeants and hanged them. And I remember the outcry, fascist and terrorist and murderer. But that was the last Irgun soldier that was ever hanged. What are we supposed to do? It's not a nice war. It's a terror war. We're dealing with a dirty enemy who doesn't play fair. He hides behind the mask of Arabs. He blends in with them. What are we supposed to do? Now my answer is a good answer. I want an exchange of populations. Beginning 1948, we took in 800,000 Jews from Arab countries. That was good. That was stage 1. Now it's stage 2. We took in the Jews. Now let's give them the Arabs. No Arab will be killed in Israel. And this way Arabs will be killed. In 5 years Israel will be a Northern Ireland in the Galilee. You'll see Arabs and Jews killed every single week there. That's the... I don't want to see Arabs killed. And I certainly don't want to see Jews killed. I wish the Arabs were well. I wish them the best elsewhere. And that is the answer. Otherwise we will have blood. And I want to tell you that part of this incredible, this insane, immoral ethics, this immoral moralism, during the war in Lebanon, from the early days on, do you know how many Jewish soldiers died needlessly? Because they were given orders not to attack PLO concentrations if they were in villages. So they had to go in without firepower and without air power. And my son was there. He said Jews were picked up by snipers because of this immoral concept. If you're in a war, you're in a war. And during World War II, when the Allied bombers bombed German cities, who do you think that they were killing? Generals? SS troops? It was a war against the German people. And their purpose was to break the German people's spirit. And they did. We're in a war today with a bitter enemy. Those Arab civilians. General Adam was killed by a 12-year-old boy. It's a dirty war. It's a miserable war. I wish it didn't exist. I wish that my son would not have to go to Lebanon. I wish that I don't have to go to Lebanon. I wish that no Jew would have to go to Lebanon. But we have to go. It's a war. It's a dirty war. And those so-called terrorists were attempting to put the fear of God into the Arabs. Because the only thing that the Arab will ever understand is fear. And that's why most of my voters are Sephardic Jews. They're the last sane people left in the country. They're untouched as yet by college professors. They live with Arabs. They live with Arabs. They live under Arabs. They know what Arabs are. They never again want to live under Arabs. Terrorism? These are the Maccabees of our time. They didn't have to do this. They did it not for themselves. They did it for the Jewish people.
The great tragedy is that Rabbi Kahane genuinely doesn't understand that General Sharon's war in Lebanon was not World War II. That what might be justified in a war for the survival of humanity, World War II, is not justified in a preemptive war, which may have had some justification in terms of a cordon sanitaire, in terms of a 12 or 15 mile. That the necessity for fighting that war into the city of Beirut was far more questionable, and that the Israeli army in general acted with great distinction in not firearming innocent villages and in not killing innocent people. It is the essence of racism to talk about the Arab. To say what Rabbi Kahane said in his opening remark, well, quote, we don't know exactly who killed so it's perfectly proper to use terrorist attacks against anybody who's an Arab. That is the difference between democracy and the rule of law on the one hand and a kind of racist oppression on the other hand. Call it by any name, but if you direct a bomb against a young Arab just because he is an Arab by ethnic background, that is racism. We have to decide exactly who the culprit was. We can't do what the Germans did. And when a Jew in Nazi Germany killed somebody, the Germans said, we couldn't figure out exactly which Jew might have done it, so we're going to take 1,000 Jews from the village and kill them. We can't emulate those who have been most barbarous in response. We cannot use these kinds of weapons and lower ourselves to an uncivilized status. Now, I agree with Rabbi Kahane, there is a problem. Israel should not become a northern island. I would like to sit down and see whether some kind of territorial compromise is not possible, whereby large Arab population centers become parts of an adjoining Arab state, whether it be a Palestinian state or Jordan, which is a Palestinian state, expanded in some way. I'd like to see an exchange of population. I would like not to see any Jews who are now resident in the West Bank, in areas that are not Arab population centers, be allowed to remain there as a security border in exchange for ceding some heavily populated Arab land that don't have immense security needs today, so that Israel doesn't run into the problem of a Northern Ireland. These are going to be very difficult to work through. It's not popular in the debate to come up with solutions that are not simple-minded and don't get immediate applause because they don't appeal to a kind of very easy solution. These are hard questions. These are not going to be resolved overnight. These are not going to be resolved in a year or 5 years or 2 years. The situation today with Egypt is far better than it was 10 years ago and far worse than it should be. To say that there's peace in the Middle East, of course, is unrealistic. To say that there's more peace than there was 7 or 8 or 10 years ago is not at all realistic. One has to assess the net benefits and the net disadvantages of an operation like Operation Peace in Galilee. Israelis are assessing it, and Israelis are coming back today in increasing numbers with some negative conclusions about the second phase of the operation in Lebanon. It's for Israel to decide those questions. They are doing it in an intelligent, in a rational, and in a democratic manner. And I suspect that when the time comes to vote and to see how the Israelis evaluate the operations in Lebanon, we're going to see some very, very mixed results. We're seeing, as I think it was said in the New York Times yesterday, that there's an enormous amount of support for Israeli strategic, long-term goals, and the long-term goals are withdrawal from Lebanon, and that they're on the tactical goals, in fact, on the tactical goals of how Israel gets out of Lebanon. The Israelis tend to be very hawkish. Let's protect the Israeli soldiers. On the long-term goals, the public opinion polls show that Israelis are increasingly dovish. These are problems that are not going to provide for simple solutions, and they will be resolved in a democratic fashion by Israelis like Rabbi Kahane, whose children and whose bodies are on the line. This is not for Americans to debate in democratic parliaments here or in great halls like this here. These are debates that must occur in Israel. They are occurring in Israel forcefully and openly. The great response that the Israeli people gave to the massacres at Shatila and Sabra are what the world must listen to. The fact that there is dispute and debate about what's going on there, and not to look only at Rabbi Kahane as a representative of some of the worst aspects, of some of the worst feelings, and some of the worst instincts that people have in Israel. I agree with him. He does appeal to a segment of the Israeli society, and he does appeal to a segment of the Israeli society that tends to share some of those racist views. And it tells us something, that some of these people come from different backgrounds, but those are not the best traditions that exist in Israel. Most Israelis want peace, and they want peace with justice.
Speaking of peace, you were a supporter, Professor. You were the responder to that one. A little bit longer than but we'll get to it. Professor Dershowitz, you were a supporter of the Camp David peace accords. In retrospect, you think that they were a mistake. How would you change it? And what do you think of the new so-called proposal for peace that was jointly put forth by the PLO and the Jordanians?
I firmly believe that peace is a process and that we will not achieve peace in the Middle East by some breakthrough of magical nature. I do support, not only do I support the Camp David agreements, I take great pride in the fact that 3 of my former students were instrumental in drafting the Camp David agreements. And some Aaron Barak said it was an all-Harvard agreement because Stuart Eisenstadt did it for the American side, Aaron Barak trained at Harvard did it for the Israeli side, and El Boaz trained at Harvard did it for the Egyptian side. Notwithstanding that pride, I think the Camp David agreements were a very important first step forward. As somebody once said, I think, there can be no war in the Middle East without Egypt, and there can be no peace without Syria. We are now at the phase in which we are not with war, and we are not with peace. I think the step forward was a very important one. It showed that there can be a status somewhere between peace and war, which is better than the status of complete warfare. The proposals that have recently been made by the PLO reflect great dissension within the PLO. I think the PLO is a terrorist organization which has a multifaceted leadership. And I think what Israel ought to be doing now is trying to strengthen the hand of, I hate to use the word moderates, because they are not moderates. The moderate wing of the PLO, by any standards, is an extremist wing. The extremist wing is an unthinkably brutal wing. But I think Israel, the only game in town today, is the PLO leadership. And I think trying to sit down with a mixed delegation of Palestinians and Jordanians and Egyptians is going to be an essential step. I think what has to happen is that the Israeli leadership, and I'm glad to see that the leadership under the current Prime Minister is being considerably more flexible about these matters than under the prior Prime Minister. I think that we have never had a better opportunity for peace in the Middle East in the last 4 or 5 years than exists now. And I hope and pray that both the Israelis, the Egyptians, the Jordanians, and those elements, both within the Palestinians and within the PLO, will see that it's to their mutual benefit and advantage to work this out. And nobody is going to come to a peace agreement of the kind that Rabbi Kahane would like to see. A magical solution whereby suddenly there are no belligerencies, there are no warfares, there are no terrorists. There's going to be terrorism in Israel. It's going to continue for the foreseeable future. There is going to be enmity by Arab states in Israel. It's going to continue in the foreseeable future. What we are looking for is the least worst solution. The least worst solution is far from the best solution. And I think we are making steps forward to see steps in that direction become realities. And I am very optimistic today that we can see progress toward a kind of peace that many American Jews, many Israeli Jews, and many moderates would find acceptable. That's the furthest I'm prepared to go. Again, I can't give you magical solutions. If I could, I could be in politics today. I wouldn't be up here trying to argue the pros and cons of various incremental steps. I think these incremental steps are important. I support them. I support Camp David. I support American efforts today to try to achieve peace. And I support the recent closer ties between the Israeli government and the American government. And I'm optimistic that these will lead in the right direction, if not to the right immediate solutions.
I think Camp David was a disaster. As someone who served in the Sinai and saw the air bases that we gave up and the expansive territory that we gave up, territory that was 2.5 times the size of all of Israel, plus the occupied lands. There are no Arab moderates. There are 2 kinds of Arabs. Clever ones and stupid ones. The stupid ones say what they mean. Syria, Libya. The clever ones mean it, but have learned that you can't beat Israel on the battlefield, so you beat them at the peace table. What country starts 5 wars and loses 5 wars and then demands land? And what country is attacked 5 times and wins 5 times and gives it up? There's no war today between Israel and Egypt, that's true. And there was no war between Israel and Egypt for 11 years, from from 1956 to 1967. You know why? Because they thought that they could not win. On the day that the Egyptians learned to use the F-16s well, and the M68 tanks well, and on the day that they have gone back into the Arab family, you'll see what it means to have given up the Sinai and brought their troops back within 60 miles of our cities. I was in Yamit and I spoke to the head of the Southern Command. And the day before we were dragged out, and I said to him, you know how many thousands of Jewish boys will die because of what you did. And he said, I know, but I'm a soldier and I have orders. Of course I want peace. I'm not a fool. The Arabs don't want peace. Why do we have such contempt for them? The question isn't the Sinai. The question isn't the West Bank. There's not one Arab refugee living in Lebanon who comes from the West Bank. Every single one comes from the Galilee and from Haifa. There's not one Arab refugee in Gaza who comes from the West Bank. Half of them come from Jaffa, and from Ramla, and from Lida, and from Beersheba, and from what is now Ashdod, Ashkelon. That's what they want. And I understand them. They believe the country is theirs. I understand them. That's the issue. The existence of a Jewish state. We sit and we babble about peace with justice. How wonderful that is in Harvard Square. But how hollow that rings in Israel, which faces an enemy which before there was a Jewish state didn't accept it. 1960. Let's compromise on the 67 boundaries. Territorial compromise. What did they want in 1947? What was the opposite of peace in 1947? The occupied lands of 1967? Why were they murdering Jews in 1937? Because of the occupied lands of 1967? In 1929 in Hebron, when they killed in one day 67 Jews, what was bothering them? Obviously, the occupied lands of 1967. Camp David was a tragedy because for the first time, Menachem Begin, you're happy about this present government because it is not as uncompromising. Well, the uncompromising government of Begin, the Sinai, because it was pressured by American Jews, and by American Jewish leaders. And that's what's happening today in Israel. Because of Jews, not the Gentiles. We have lost our spirit. For the first time, I see an unhappy country. People that have lost faith in themselves. I speak to soldiers. Their hands are tied in Lebanon. Of course they're angry about Lebanon, but they weren't angry when they went in. They were angry because for 2 years now, their hands have been tied. You either fight a war or you don't fight a war. You don't fight the war and not fight the war at the same time. We send 10,000 soldiers into a sea of that, a 500,000 Shiites. What do we expect? If I were the Minister of Defense, I would not move the Israelis out of Lebanon, because on the day that we're out of Lebanon, the rockets will once again fall on the same Galilee towns that they fell upon before, but this time 640 soldiers will have died for nothing. At the same time, I would not do what the Likud wants. Stay there as it is. Of course not. This is murder. This is murder. Keep the Israeli troops in southern Lebanon and move the Shiites out north. That is the answer. The world would scream for a month, and then they would turn to Afghanistan. We are in a game of hardball. The easiest to talk about peace, and one wants to talk about easy answers. Easy answers. The easiest and most important of all answers is to throw out this peace and love and brother. Who is not for peace? Who is not for love? Who is not for brotherhood? The multifaceted PLO. You're right. There are extremist terrorists and moderate terrorists. the moderate terrorists kill Jews moderately. What is a moderate terrorist? They're another terrorist. Yasser Arafat, in the news media, thanks in great measure, and of course it's unwittingly, thanks to such talk here, is built up as a moderate. He is a person who can bring himself to say, I accept Israel. And so, like some pupilistic Talmudist, we read into what he said. Well, he really meant this. No, he didn't mean that. He wants to wipe out Israel. If he could, he would do it by bombing us out of existence. He can't today because we bombed him out of Lebanon. So suddenly he has no other choice. He has to become moderate. But the aim is the same. First move them back to the 67 borders. And then move them to the 1947 borders. And then move them into the city.
Professor Dershowitz, take it away.
I just want to consider for a moment the implications of Rabbi Kahane's plan. As I understand it, it's first to move the Arabs out of Israel, then to move them out of southern Lebanon, which I guess would be very broadly defined as anything south of northern Beirut, then move them out of western Egypt, and then, I gather, move them eastern Egypt and then western Jordan. The implications are just frightening. The answer that Rabbi Kahane seems to believe in is simply depopulation of all the areas surrounding Israel. I mean, is he calling for the biblical state of Israel from the Tigris to the Euphrates River? Is he really asking for a depopulation of everything up through Iraq and Syria and Jordan? Obviously, that will simply not be permitted by the world community today. It will not be one day of news to be replaced by Ethiopia, especially because I think Rabbi Kahane would have the Israeli army into Ethiopia within a relatively short period of time. There is no security in the 21st century and in the end of the 20th century simply in additional miles. It is unrealistic in the extreme to think that Israeli security can be established by 1 more mile or 5 more miles or 10 more miles of depopulation. I agree with Rabbi Kahane that Yasser Arafat is no moderate. I agree with Rabbi Kahane that Yasser Arafat would bomb Israel out of existence if it had the choice to do so. But think of the implications of a world without a Yasser Arafat, with a George Habash taking over instead of a Yasser Arafat, a George Habash who has closer ties with the Soviet Union and radical terrorists all over the world. We have to deal with what we have. It is not a pleasant situation. I agree with Rabbi Kahane that this is a game of hardball. But when I played hardball, I used to use curves and sinkers and changes of pace, and not just try to get by with overpowering fastballs. Once you use overpowering fastballs, they learn how to hit off you very easily, and they learn to call your bluff. I don't want to see Israel every year in another war, moving back populations more and more and more. Inevitably, that will result in a much larger population of Arabs within Israel. The solutions have to be found elsewhere. They have to be found, again, in this word that Rabbi Kahane hates so much, this word compromise. Attempts to reach out and try to seek out the best in the worst. Try to arrive at situations that are palatable, if not wonderful. And I think that the Israeli leadership over the years has shown vision. And any time an Israeli leader has shown vision, even when it's a hero of Rabbi Kahane, like Menachem Begin, when the vision results in a return of territory, which most Israeli military leaders said was certainly not giving up much in terms of security in light of the demilitarized status of the situation, in exchange for the prospect of peace. Rabbi Kahane is the first to criticize it. You have to take risks for peace. You have to take risks to try to see if we can achieve the imperfect peace that all of us would like to see ultimately become a perfect peace. But I am appalled at the prospect of continuing military involvement by Israel in continuing preventive wars headed by a General Sharon who knows of no distinctions of the kind that Rabbi Kahane rejects as well between attacking civilian populations and attacking military populations. Yes, Israel is criticized, but I think among those who are sensible and who think, Israel is praised for the care it has generally taken, with some exceptions, some tragic exceptions, in trying to behave in a relatively civilized way in protecting its borders. And when it comes to appraising Israelis' actions in the war, I think history will judge them not by the fact that they killed some civilians, which they did, and too many, but by the fact that they refrained from killing civilians, by the fact that they did exactly what Rabbi Kahane rebels against. They put Jewish soldiers at risk in order to prevent the savings of many, many innocent Arab civilians. That's the essence of civilization. I may be going beyond my expertise when I say I also think that's the best of the essence of Jewishness.
Rabbi Kahane, you have criticized establishment Jewish groups, the ADL, the AJC, the American Jewish Committee. You seem to spend most of your time criticizing these groups. Doesn't everybody else criticize them enough? Why do you have to add to it?
I spend nearly the amount of time dwelling on those groups as they dwell on their Kahane. And I certainly do not take any great pleasure in attacking Jewish establishment groups, but the truth is that the history of the American Jewish organizations, and of course there is much good that they have done, but on balance, is a tragedy. It was these Jewish establishment groups who during the Holocaust must bear the brunt of the blame for knowing that a Holocaust is taking place and not acting. No one can tell me when I hear that a Leonard Fein or a Balfour Britain or a Rabbi Shin will go to the South African embassy and get arrested for blacks in Africa. And I know that Leonard Fein has never in his life been arrested for Soviet Jewry. I hear the echoes of a Jewish establishment which in the 1940s did not go and sit on Pennsylvania Avenue and chain themselves to the White House gates and demand the bombing of the railroad lines leading to Auschwitz. I remember these groups and these leaders and these rabbis who fought the battles for blacks and for Chicanos and for lettuce and for grapes and all of these issues. And how can I therefore refrain? In fact, the JDL came into being as a reaction against this, as a Jewish group which stated that for Jews, Jewish interests come first. Who will fight for Jewish interests? As a Jewish group that will sit and cringe at hearing words such as, we risk Jewish lives, and that was the best of Judaism. My God. It's not even the best of humanism, let alone the best of Judaism. Professor Dershowitz, let me tell you, the life of one Jewish soldier in Lebanon was worth more than the lives of every Arab in the country. The Jewish establishment for what it has done, spiritual genocide to Jewish youth in this country. They were the creators of the melting pot, the 11th commandment, thou shalt melt. They were the demonstrators of interfaith, and every interfaith Friday night when Bernie and Bridget would get together and hear the temple rabbi cry out, there is no such a difference between Jews and Christians, they're all God's children, and they heard it, they heard the message, and they went out and they got married as God's children, because there was no such a difference. My God, I can stand here for days and speak of the crimes of these people. Soviet Jewry, today, yes. Today they do for Soviet Jewry. But I remember when they did nothing. I remember when no one knew that there was any problem known as Soviet Jewry. When all the Jews were talking about such Jewish problems as Angela Davis, out here at Brandeis, under Rabbi Axelrod. I remember when Jews knew not what Soviet Jewry, Jews were fighting for Vietnam and for Cuba. Well, I wish that I could work with them. I wish that there were the kinds of people who would understand that Jewish funds should go for Jewish causes. And Jewish causes don't include Jewish hospitals. I don't know what a Jewish hospital is. A hospital is a hospital, and all people get sick. Jews, Catholics, Protestants, thank God, atheists, everybody can get sick. We don't need a Jewish hospital. We should build hospitals the United way, but Jewish funds should go for Jewish day schools and yeshivas, and for Jewish youth, and for those things which we have no right to ask others to fund. I'm angry at the Jews, at the Jewish leadership of Boston for having turned their backs on the elderly and the poor Jews of Mattapan and Dorchester. So, I'm ready to have them steal my book, steal my program, take over my program, and I'll stop criticizing them.
Proudly announce that the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith this Thursday night is conducting a Black Jewish Seder in the best traditions of that organization, in the best traditions of interfaith. I'm proud to stand up against apartheid. I will, if necessary, be arrested if I have to. Struggling for Soviet Jewry and for Soviet dissidents. I call on my black brothers and sisters and my Arab brothers and sisters to join me in the fight for Soviet Jewry and to join me in the fight for Soviets and other Jews oppressed in all parts of the world. I ask all people of goodwill to join this Sunday, March 31st, 1985 at 3:30 p.m. when I will be speaking and many will be joining us on a rally in March for oppressed Jewry. I will hope that this will be not only as a Jewish issue, because Israel is not only a Jewish issue, and apartheid is not only a black issue. These are all human rights issues. I have to agree with Rabbi Kahane that I am very disappointed sometimes when I go to an anti-apartheid rally and I see many Jews joining many blacks. And then I go to a Soviet Jewry rally and I see too few blacks joining the many Jews. That is a black problem which must be addressed in this community. And we as Jews must insist on some degree of camaraderie and some degree of rapprochement and some degree of quid pro quo. We must insist, and we must not say we will not participate in apartheid demonstrations, because they are our demonstrations and nobody can take them away from us. When Leonard Fine participates in an anti-apartheid demonstration, he is doing it because he's a Jew and a good Jew. And he realizes that discrimination anywhere in the world is discrimination everywhere in the world. And he realizes that the same laws that permit blacks to be treated in an inferior manner in South Africa are modeled on the laws which permitted Jews to be treated in an inferior fashion in Nazi Germany. These are all our problems. And when Leonard Fine speaks out, as he does on an almost daily basis, against the oppression in the Soviet Union, it is wrong for anybody to think that Rabbi Meir Kahane discovered Soviet Jewry. Well before Rabbi Meir Kahane was involved with Soviet Jewry, Lou Weinstein of Boston, Massachusetts, who cares greatly about the poor and the elderly of Mattapan, and who was the head of these various Jewish organizations, which Rabbi Kahane so glibly condemns, was very deeply involved in the plight of Soviet Jewry, and the plight of other Jews around the world, and the plight of other people around the world. The 11th commandment is not thou shalt melt. The 11th commandment is thou shalt not condemn ignorantly. Thou shalt not condemn one's friends and one's neighbors and one's supporters because they don't agree with you 100% of the way. Yes, we as Jews, many of us, were involved in the Vietnam War, but Rabbi Kahane, let us not forget that so were you. You were involved defending the American role in Vietnam while we were opposing the American role in Vietnam. If a Jew can take an active role on one side of that issue, surely a Jew can take an active role on the other side of that issue. To your credit, you have never spoken in favor of apartheid. I wish you would speak more against apartheid. I wish you would understand that these human rights struggles around the world are indivisible. We have not succeeded. I am very disappointed, and I'll say it very frankly, very disappointed in the way that some third world people whom we support on many issues fail to support us on our issues. But that will not drive us from our united struggle. Our united struggle is to bring about human rights throughout the world, and we will continue to fight for human rights. I can't speak for you, but I know I can speak for Rabbi Axelrod, and I know I can speak for Leonard Fine, and I know I can speak for Leonard Zakin of the ADL, and I know I can speak for people from the American Jewish Congress, the American Jewish Committee. These are not people that are ruining our young children. These are people that are showing our young children at colleges and universities around the country that Judaism speaks with many voices, that Judaism speaks to many needs, that Judaism speaks to many people. The presence of Hillel, of American Jewish Congress, of American Jewish Committee, of the Anti-Defamation League has broadened the pull. So has Rabbi Kahane. And that's why I'm here saying that there is room in the United States for all nonviolent ideologies which call people into the Jewish fold and into the human rights fold. And I say 2.5 cheers, because I'm never willing to give 3 cheers to any organization, but 2.5 cheers to the major Jewish organizations. They need improvement. I think too many of them take too seriously the Jewish philosophy espoused in Tevia's song on Fiddler on the Roof. You know, if he's rich, they think he really knows. That we dominate too much of our Jewish organizations by people of wealth and not by people of intelligence. I think there are changes that have to be made in the Jewish leadership. But I think these changes have to be in the area of broadening the leadership and not narrowing the leadership. And to their credit, many of these organizations are now opening up positions, opening up leadership positions to young people, to feminists, to radicals, to people who simply declare themselves Jews. We do not take tests of people's Jewishness. If you say you're a Jew and you want to join in a Jewish human rights endeavor, as far as I'm concerned, welcome aboard.
Before each of you speaks, I am going to ask perhaps the most difficult question of all night, and I hope your answer will be brief. Which qualities in your opponent do you admire the most?
I think that certainly the one quality which comes to my mind is the persistency, consistency of repeatedly making the same mistakes. I must say that obviously the quality is the fact that Dr. Dershowitz, Professor Dershowitz, is willing to debate the issues. Unlike all the rest, He doesn't run from the issues. He comes, he debates them. I think that he's a consistent person in his advocacy of freedom of speech, and the right of all views, to be heard. That is not true for other Jewish views. That is simply not true. I simply cannot allow those last words to simply go unchallenged, because I believe that this question of Jews taking up the rights of blacks in South Africa and so on will be one of the major burning issues of our time. I want to tell you something. It's not a question of apartheid. The question is it good for the Jews? What kind of a government will rule South Africa if the African National Congress takes over? That's the practical question. And I tell you, it will be a viciously anti-Israel government. It will be one which will join the rest of Black Africa in being almost totally anti-Israel. And I want to ask you, Mr. Dershowitz, and let it find, knowing that had you lived or had you been active in the 1950s, when Algeria was seeking its independence from France, and there's no question that it had the right to independence, and there's no question that France was in imperialist power, a colonialist state, and yet knowing that when Algeria received its freedom, it would join the Arab League and be one of the most hostile anti-Israel states. Should Jews have supported them? The question to me here is it good for the Jews? I despise the South African government, but I am not about to go and make that government fall, knowing that the government that takes its place will be one that doesn't support Israel, as this one does. Not apartheid. It's a question of Havdalah, of how to make the distinction when to fight for and oppress people and when not to fight. When that oppressed people will turn around and start to oppress you, you don't fight for it. I took a stand on Vietnam not because I gave a damn about Vietnam. I took a stand on Vietnam on the basis, is it good for Israel? I fear that if America lost that war, it would forever not want to get involved in any other conflict. And we have seen that happen now. The question to me always was, is a strong America good for Israel or bad for Israel? And I said it was good for Israel. That's why I took that stand. Always on the basis, is it good for the Jews? I don't know who Weinstein is, and I'm sure that he cared for Soviet Jews. I know one thing. Ask any Russian Jew who Weinstein is, and they don't know. And ask any Russian Jew who Meir Kahane is, and they do. And I say that not, God forbid, out of arrogance. What I say is, of course Jews care about the Soviet Jewish people. It's not enough to care about it. We have to get out into the streets and do something about it. And put the issue on page 1 of the New York Times, which didn't give a damn about it. And to do that, you have to be ready to sacrifice. And I'm happy that Professor Dershowitz is prepared to go to jail for Russian Jews. I just wonder what's taken him such a long time. Anytime you would like to, I'm prepared to join you, chaining myself to any particular place that the Boston police will say no to, and we'll go to jail together.
thing I most admire about Rabbi Kahane is his absolute certainty about life. I wish I could have it. I wish I could share it. Life would be so simple if I could just turn upwardly and get all the answers to my problems. Those of us who are doubters, who aren't blessed with certainty, have to look to methods, have to look to mechanisms for resolving disputes, have to look at complicated solutions like democracy. It's so tempting to be able to do what my grandmother used to do when I came back from the Brooklyn Dodger game in the 1950s, and I'd say, Grandma, the Jews won. Oh, I spoiled it. The Dodgers won. And she'd say, yeah, but was it good or bad for the Jews? And I'd have to explain to her whether or not Sandy Koufax pitched that day, or whether or not it had a Jewish implication. I just can't see life so simply. In the last analysis, in the long run, we'll all be dead. And as a secularist, I don't look for salvation from heaven. I have to live my life here on earth. Here on earth, I see an abomination in South Africa that occurs right now. The abomination was far worse than the colonialism that existed in Algeria in relation to France. By the way, life is so much more complicated. When Algeria was controlled by France, the Arabs had far more influence on French policy than the Arabs currently have on French policy. So the independence of Algeria obviously sent a mixed message in world affairs. The same thing is true in South Africa today. I don't want to debate the merits or demerits on issues of pragmatism. I just want to introduce certainly a doubting conclusion in the debate. It certainly might very well be in the best interest of Israel, and certainly some Israeli diplomats believe that, to be on the forefront of opposition to apartheid. In part because that might result eventually in a less radical South African government, which might be less opposed to Israel. I'm not suggesting for a moment that any black South African government will immediately make peace with Israel and become Israel's strongest supporters. But there are degrees of opposition and support within black Africa today for Israel. Israel has an entire diplomatic corps trying to bring about rapprochement with countries in South Africa, and the answer is not simplistic. There are some countries that are more pro-Israel, there are some countries that are more anti-Israel. It's a matter of degree. It's a matter of degree within South Africa as well. But I can't ask the question only in terms of is it good or bad for the Jews. Is it good or bad for the world? Is it good or bad for human rights? I have to ask the question that way. Maybe that doesn't make me a good enough Jew for Rabbi Kahane, but that's the way in which many Jews, I think, around the world will see that problem. I'm not anxious to go to jail for any cause. I'm not one who frivolously cheapens the currency of civil disobedience, the way I think Rabbi Kahane has over the years. Rabbi Kahane going to jail no longer gets any attention because it's a frequent enough event. One finds it very hard to distinguish between those times when Rabbi Kahane goes to jail just on the basis of a whim and invites others to join him, and when he's really trying to make an important point. As I said, I am prepared to engage in civil disobedience when I think it's called for. And when it's called for, I will not shrink from doing that. I would like, however, to see if we can resolve some of these issues in more peaceable manners. I think civil disobedience is a last resort, not a first resort. And I would like us all again to join together and try in the best traditions of what I think is real Jewishness, to stand together against oppression all over the world, yes, to focus, yes, to ask the question, how will it impact on the Jewish community? How will it impact on Israel? I think that too much many Jews ask themselves how every other group in the world will do other than Jews. I think the Scylla and Charybdis of undue parochialism and undue universalism has to be avoided. Everybody has to make the decision for themselves. How much attention should be devoted to Jewish causes, how much attention to other causes. I can only tell you there is enough time in life to do both.
I'd like to thank Professor Alana Dershowitz, Department of Law, and Rabbi Kahane, the Jewish professor of the top. Okay, why don't we start with some questions? We were supposed to have a Michael. microphone here. And you can line up in front of the microphone and ask the question so everybody can hear. So please do that if you have a question.
The point of attacking that Arab bus and the point of the Jewish terror, not only in our time, but in the 1930s and 40s, the counter-terror, was to implant terror in the hearts of a population which knows who the terrorists are, which hides the Arab terrorists, to teach them that as long as there is Arab terror, that you will suffer too, in the hope that they will spit them out. That is the point of counter-terror. Now again, I say that there is no need for this. If the government of Israel would have taken a strong hand, a strong policy against Arabs, there would have never been any hostile leaders. Anyone who lives in Israel knows the difference of the Arab reaction over the last 10, 15 years. After the Six-Day War, Arabs walked in terror. They were afraid of the Jews. As they saw that it's not so terrible, they began to use terror.